Today we are going to learn about the physical features of Asia. On the first slide is a painting done by Mrs. Solomon's favorite artist, Hokusai. He was one of the great masters of Japanese woodblock print, and he did more than 100 paintings in a series which were dedicated to Mount Fuji. He was one of the first great landscape artists. Asia is known as the land of extremes. It has the highest point, Mount Everest, to the lowest point, the Dead Sea, over in Israel. It has some of the wettest areas down here over in Southeast Asia, and some of the driest areas in Southwest Asia. And it of course has mountainous areas and then plains areas as well. You're going to want to get out a piece of paper and a pencil because you're going to be taking notes after each section. You have 3 focus questions today. How have physical processes shaped the landscape of Asia? Why are rivers important natural resources in Asia? What problem affects many rivers in Asia? How do geographic factors affect where people live in Asia? Which geographic factors encourage growth? And which factors discourage human settlement? So please pause the video right now if you don't have a piece of paper and a pencil. 200 million years ago, the land now called the Indian subcontinent in the region of South Asia was attached to the east coast of Africa. A subcontinent is a large landmass that is a major part of a continent. Eventually the land shifted and cracked, and the continents drifted. India slowly crept toward Asia. 40 million years ago, India collided with Asia, and just as in a car crash, the two front ends of the cars will crumple, Asia crumpled where they met. What huge mountains were created? That's right, the Himalayas. Today, these mountains are still growing. Scientists estimate that Mount Everest is growing about 2 inches a year. Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet, or about 5.5 miles high. Islands were also shaped by natural forces. What physical processes do you think created the islands of Japan and Southeast Asia? How has the Ring of Fire impacted geography? Remember, the Ring of Fire is a circle of earthquakes and volcanoes surrounding the Pacific Ocean. And you can see here that there are many, many earthquakes and volcanoes in this area. And that is what created many of the islands in Southeast Asia. The landscape today is still being changed by volcanoes and earthquakes. Here's some pictures of some of the famous volcanoes. Indonesia, Russia, and the Philippines. Of course, a famous earthquake that took place in March of last year was the Japanese earthquake, which caused the tsunami. You can see there where the earthquake hit, and then these pictures show how the tsunami, the waves spread out across the Pacific Ocean. This picture at top here shows you the wave that comes, the tsunami. And then here is the water surge. The water surge usually is what causes the most damage. It is a huge, huge force that moves lots of land. Tsunamis have been part of Japan's history. They are even in artwork created over 200 years ago. Hokusai, here's one of his most famous paintings, The Great Wave, and of course in the background you see Mount Fuji. The Tibetan Plateau is the highest and biggest plateau in the world, an area of almost 1 million square miles, or about 4 times the size of France, and its nickname is therefore the rooftop of the world. And I just threw this in for some interesting information since we talked about Buddhism for Cambodia. This is a picture of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. He is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan Buddhists and the head of his government. He promotes peace, compassion, and tolerance. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 and is known for his support of Tibetans inside and outside of Tibet, which was taken over by the Chinese, and the Dalai Lama was exiled and went to India. Tibetans traditionally believe him to be the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lamas. He was identified at the age of 2 as the rebirth of the 13th Dalai Lama, but he didn't take control until he was of the age of 15. He's a charismatic speaker. He has traveled the world advocating for the Tibetans and teaching Tibetan Buddhism and talking about the importance of compassion as the source of a happy life. At this point, please stop the video and make sure that you answer, or pause the video and answer the first question. We've given several examples. Okay, the next section that we're going to do is why are the rivers important natural resources in Asia? Here's a map showing you many of the major rivers in Asia. This map should look familiar. We have the Changjiang River, also called the Yangtze River, which is right here. It is the longest river in all of Asia. We have the Huanghe River, or the Yellow River, and many people live along the banks there, as well as the Yangtze. We have the Mekong River, which we learned about with Cambodia. It starts up in China and flows down through several countries, including Cambodia. The Ganges River, the Holy River in India, the Indus River, and of course the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Changjiang, or Yangtze River, is the longest, and it is deep enough for ships to travel. In the past 2,000 years, it has experienced 215 catastrophic floods. So to control the river and generate electricity, the Chinese eventually built what was called the Three Gorges Dam. This is a picture of the area that was called the Gorges area. It was a tourist site because it was so beautiful. Here's a picture of the Three Gorges Dam. The dam flooded, however, archaeological sites, cultural sites. It displaced 1.3 million people, had to leave their homes. And it is also causing significant ecological changes, including an increased risk of landslides. The building of the dam is a very controversial topic in China and around the world. The Yangtze, though, has problems with pollution. There are 265 billion gallons of raw sewage are dumped into the Yangtze annually, and they of course buried factories and abandoned mines were submerged, so they're worried about, of course, the toxins which must be in the river area. And here are pictures showing the before and after and during the building of the dam. And it is the largest dam in the world. The Huanghe River, 400 million people live along the banks. It runs through the North China Plain. The water is much too polluted to use for humans or for agriculture, but they still use it because that's the only water they have available. Cancer rates in China in this area are soaring. The pollution and lack of water are issues for 75% of China's rivers. Now, it was called the Huanghe River because which means yellow river, because of the yellow loess soil that was in it. It flows through the North China Plain as well, and you can kind of see that it has a yellowish tint to it. There are very few pollution regulations which have led to the pollution of the rivers. If you recall, at the Olympics a few years back in China, they had to import water to fill the pool because they didn't want to pollute the athletes, and there were some athletes who refused to swim in the polluted water of China. Here's the Mekong River, which starts in China and flows through Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. These are Hindus bathing in the Ganges River, which begins in the Himalayas. It's fertile plains. It's the most sacred river of Hindus in India. The fertile Ganges Plain is one of the world's most densely populated regions. They are able to grow rice, grains, oilseeds, sugarcane, and cotton in that area. It is one of the major population centers of India, and the river is highly polluted. This is a picture, a kind of cool picture of the Indus River, which begins in the Himalayas and flows west through Pakistan. In Southwest Asia, some of the most fertile soil in the world lies along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. But if you recall, we have the Rub al Khali empty quarter in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the largest desert areas. Sorry, these are out of order. Here's the Fertile Crescent. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, you can see here, this area was called the Fertile Crescent because it was shaped like a crescent moon. And when these rivers flood, they deposit rich soils, which are good for growing crops. The only areas in this part of the world that are really good for growing a variety of crops. These rivers are also important for transportation. These rivers give Iraq their only outlet to the sea. The Fertile Crescent refers to an ancient area of fertile soil and important rivers that stretch in an arc from and covers Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. So pause the video now and please answer the question, why are rivers important natural resources in Asia, and what problem affects many rivers in Asia? Okay, the last section deals with population and how geographic factors affect that. Remember, population density is how many people live in a square mile. And as you can see, the colors are very, very purple over in Asia over here. So very densely populated. This is a population density map that shows different parts of Asia. Why do you think the area in eastern China is so populated? It's because people want to live in the lowland and coastal areas, and of course they live along the rivers. Why then is western China so desolate? It's because we have the Gobi Desert, the Tibetan Plateau, and the Himalaya Mountains, which are very hard to live on. Saudi Arabia and Southwest Asia is less densely populated than East Asia and India. Remember, this area is nicknamed the dry world. It is mostly desert, very hard to live. People in this area fight over water, and many depend on the date palm tree because that's one of the only things that they can grow. Why is there this strip of dense population in northern India? It's because of the Ganges River. People, again, choose to live near water. Southeast Asia has many forested areas and mountains, and people tend to live in the valleys that are between the mountain areas. Here's a picture of the Gobi Desert and the yurt people who live, a yurt, which is the building that they live in. Here you can see the Gobi Desert is encroaching on Beijing. They have a lot of problems with the Gobi Desert moving and desertification in China. Here you can see that dust storms are coming into Beijing, and sometimes people have to wear masks. Here's a picture of the Mongolian Plateau, another place hard to live on. It's too cold. This shows climate. Southeast Asia is very, very wet, and Southwest Asia is very, very dry. And remember, we have the monsoons that affect the area. The wet monsoon goes from the ocean to the land, bringing months of rain, and the dry monsoon goes from the land to the water, making it a dry season. This shows Japan, which is very, very mountainous. Almost half the population is crowded on less than 3% of the land. 80% of the people live in cities in Japan. Here are Hindu Kush Mountains of Pakistan. Again, people aren't going to choose to live in an area like this because it's very difficult to survive. Arable land. Arable land is land that is able to be farmed. Southwest Asia has a lack of arable land. It can't produce crops. You can see that it's very, very red and orange over in this area. Less than 10% of the land can produce crops in that area. There's not enough water to go around, so the amount of water in an area is going to affect the population as well. In Southeast Asia, you find land that supports the growing of rice. These are some pictures of rice paddies in Indonesia. Rice is a staple food crop of millions, billions of people that live in Asia. Here they had to cut terraces into the side of a mountain or a hill so they would have space to grow their crops. It's just a cool picture of a terrace. And now please stop the video and answer the third question.